I feel that this is going to severely affect the way we live our lives, and the way we work for probably 2 or 3 years to come.
You must stay at home.
Whatever it takes.
We will beat the coronavirus, and we will beat it together.
Welcome back to Ask Dr Hilary, Coronavirus Explained. Let's start about the exit strategy. There's been a bit of debate about this, whether the government actually has one or not. Matt Hancock's obviously talking about actually we need to focus on the delay stage of the virus and then move on to that. What comes next? What is our exit strategy?
The exit strategy will depend on the number of cases that we're seeing, how the NHS is getting on coping with the demand from patients who are sick, and how well people are socially distancing themselves from other people and obeying the guidance. So it's difficult to say exactly what the exit strategy will be and when it will take place, but basically, the strategy is to cope with the number of patients coming in by flattening the curve, not seeing so many patients all at once. We're going to see more patients, but we don't want them all at once, and that's what lockdown is all about. So when we start to see a fall in the number of people testing positive and being admitted to hospital, then we can think about a graduated de-restriction of lockdown, allowing certain sections of society out from lockdown and then others later on. So it's going to be graded, and it's going to be dependent on what we see in terms of patient numbers and prevalence of the virus in the general population.
What can we learn from other viruses that have happened in the past, for example, the Spanish flu, and how to deal with an exit strategy properly? Because obviously we want to avoid there being a huge second wave or even a third wave of the virus.
We have to remember that a lot of people are comparing this pandemic to the pandemic of 1918. What we know then is that swept the world, and something like 50 million people lost their lives, often young, fit, healthy people otherwise. More people who died in the war. And it was a dreadful pandemic. Of course, then we didn't have antibiotics to treat secondary bacterial infection, that the state of housing was much poorer, poverty was greater, people had just come through a war, and we weren't able to isolate people in splendid hospitals as we can now. So the circumstances are very different. However, what we do know about that virus was that it came back, it resurged a year later in a different form, and a lot of people in that second wave lost their lives because they had an overwhelming immune response, having been exposed to it before. So we can learn that we must never be complacent with this particular virus. It's very nasty, it's very contagious, it's very virulent for some people, and it can change the way our immune systems behave and work. So we will not be complacent. We will be very cautious about the treatments we use and the freedom we give to people afterwards, in terms of can they really relax, and do we need to remain vigilant as scientists and doctors? And I think that will be the case.
Obviously, the question everyone wants to know is, when will this lockdown end? We don't know the answer to that. Could be months, could be weeks, whatever. But I want to ask you, how long could this virus affect our lives just generally? I mean, will we see years down the line still having to comply by certain measures to prevent this? Or do you think that, by the end of, let's say, a year, it's not going to have much effect in our lives?
Well, my view is that we have to be patient. We can see what's happened around the world. We can see what's happening in our hospitals. We can see how many people are losing their lives to this virus, both patients with pre-existing conditions, young, fit, healthy people, frontline workers. And so we must be patient and see how this pans out. But what I would say is this. My own personal view is that we need to be ready to stay at home for quite a bit longer than people are currently talking about. I wouldn't be surprised if that period is 3 months or 4 months until we get a handle on this. And I feel that this is going to severely affect the way we live our lives, and the way we work for probably 2 or 3 years to come. And I'll say why, and that is because We won't be able to rush back to work. The jobs will be different. I think in terms of employment, employers have discovered that actually there are many ways to work. Other than coming into the office or traveling around the world, people can do a lot of work from home. That may not be a bad thing. I think that people will be starting having lost a lot of money, and therefore they won't be buying the luxury goods, and retailers of luxury goods will have to be prepared to take a hit until the economy recovers, which could take a while. And we've heard a lot about footballers and entertainers, haven't we, who earn big salaries, and they may feel that it'll be fine later on, but they're dependent on people buying season tickets and travelling to away matches, and people may not have that kind of money in the near future. So I think everybody needs to say, well, what's important in life? Is it friends and family and just being healthy, or is it earning shed loads of cash? And for me, I think people will, they'll reset the values that they have in life, and they'll say what's really important is coming through this with all my friends and family healthy and well, and able to do work that we enjoy, that doesn't necessarily pay us shed loads of money and gives us all the luxury goods, because we've realised that they aren't that important. But that's just my personal view.
Fantastic. Right. We'll move on to the people's questions. The first one is from Patty Cameron. They ask, will everyone eventually get some form of coronavirus?
No, not everybody will get this. We know from previous pandemics that some people, for whatever reason, random or state of health, escape it. They just never come across the virus. Some people have said that they think about 80% of the UK population will be exposed to the virus at some point. Other people think 50%. Some people think 80% have already had it. We just don't know because we can't do the testing. But no, not everyone will get this. And the whole one of the reasons that we have lockdown is to protect the very vulnerable from getting it ever. We don't want people with pre-existing conditions, people who are elderly, to ever come across the virus. And if we can protect them, then we'll be saving tens, probably hundreds of thousands of lives.
Question 2 is from Maggie Callahan. Now, she asks, if the virus is supposedly killed by heat, how is it that Australia has cases when it's their summer at the moment?
Well, actually, I've heard the opposite. The virus flourishes in colder climates, but we're seeing the same sort of cases in Australia and Indonesia and China, where the climate is warmer than it is here currently in the northern hemisphere. So I don't think we can rely on the climate to change the prevalence of the disease at all. The virus is fragile, but we know it can exist in moderate climates pretty well, whether it's Australia, Indonesia, China, India, you name it. Most countries, most continents in the world have been affected by the virus, and climate doesn't seem to make much difference.
Let's say the virus got onto some bit of metal in India or Australia and it was really hot. Would that be killed by the virus, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, we think that above 60 degrees and the virus struggles. So washing clothes in washes which are over 60, 65 is almost certainly going to kill off the virus, kills off that lipid layer, which just like any fat tends to dissolve. So in terms of washing hands in hot water and washing clothes in hot washes, that's probably pretty important.
The next question is from Vicky Parry. Is it true that the severity of the symptoms are linked to the amount of viral load that you're exposed to? If so, what does that mean in practical terms? I.e., what constitutes a small viral load, touching a door handle, for example?
Well, touching a door handle would be a small exposure to virus, probably a few viruses that someone else has touched that handle, been transmitted to it. And if you touch that handle, you could transmit a few of the viruses to your face. So that's what we would consider a small viral exposure, as opposed to a large viral load, which perhaps a frontline healthcare worker in hospital would be exposed to by dealing with lots of patients coughing and sneezing on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. They'd be exposed to lots of virus. And logically, when the body is exposed to high numbers of virus particles, then you can see why that would perhaps overwhelm the immune system at the outset and make them more prone to getting a severe reaction.
Now, Gillian Quinn asks, how do the test kits work? Is it a swab test? Is it a saliva or blood test? How do you test for coronavirus?
Well, the test for acute infection is a swab test. So a doctor or a nurse would use the swab, just like an extended cotton bud, and scrape the back of the throat and the inside of the nose. And then that swab is sent off to the lab, where we do something called a PCR test, a polymerase chain reaction test, looking for portions of the virus's DNA. And that test is reliable, and it will test whether someone's got the infection or not. That's how that test is done. Takes about 2 days to get the results usually. That's opposed to the antibody test, which we're currently trying to get a very reliable test for, which tests for your immune antibodies, which tend to rise 14 to 28 days after you've had an acute infection. And that's the one we're working on, because that will tell us who's immune, who's had the infection, and who's safe to go back to work with patients, so that the patients don't pick up the virus from them.
And the government have actually ordered millions of these tests that don't actually work, the antibody tests, is that right?
Well, we know that they're not 100% reliable. We know that some of them are better than others. However, we're trying to get a test which is very sensitive. In other words, that it finds out who actually has had the virus, and is also specific in that we know that it tells us who hasn't had the virus. So that's what we call an accuracy of a test. Now, most of these tests are acceptable if they're sort of 80%, 90% reliable, and we can always do the test a second time. But if they're only 50% reliable, they're probably no better, or they might be worse than having no tests, because we just can't rely on them. So we're trying to discover which tests are the best, and trying to refine them all the time, so we've got a reliable one, and that will be a game changer when we get one.
Now, question 5 is a video question from Lisa Rickman.
Hi, Dr. Hilary. I've heard that when the UK lifts its restrictions, a new wave of infections could occur. I have mild asthma, and from what doctors have said, I'm not in the vulnerable group. What measures should I take when the restrictions are lifted, and how long for? Thank you.
The measures will be similar as they are now, that you will still have to be vigilant. We can't be complacent. When we emerge from lockdown on a graduated basis, I think that what we'll know is that there are plenty of people out there who have had the virus and are probably immune. They won't be shedding the virus anymore, and that we'll have flattened the curve. But the virus will probably continue to circulate around the world for many months to come. And until that time that we don't see any more cases, just need to be a little bit careful with hand washing and using hand sanitizer, and socially distancing, keeping away from people who are coughing and sneezing. But with mild asthma, you're probably not at great risk. If you had severe asthma where you needed steroids orally for 5 days at a time on a regular basis, you have to be more concerned. But I don't think you need to worry too much with mild asthma.
And the final question is from Trevor. Now, he asks, why have people in Western Europe and outside of China only now fallen seriously ill, given the virus has been around since December last year?
Well, even with global travel, it takes time for the virus to spread around the world. It started in Wuhan, it spread beyond that Chinese province, and as people travelled the world with unrestricted access to other countries, we began to see cases picking up. Now, it takes, on average, one person with COVID-19, they will normally spread the virus to two and a half other people, statistically. So you can imagine it does take time for that exponential rise in cases to occur. And in 4 months, you could say it's taken time. But then in 4 months, we've seen thousands of people die in Italy and Spain and Iran and around the world, and the UK as well, of course. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. For every person admitted to hospital or who loses their life, there are probably 10 times more people who've been infected but have only had mild to moderate disease. So I would say this is spread very quickly in 4 months. I don't think it's slow. I think it's very, very fast.
Great. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Ask Dr. Hilary. Now, you can watch these every day, Monday to Thursday, every week. If you want to ask a question, you can use the hashtag on social media, hashtag Ask Dr. Hilary, or you can go to the Sun's website at thesun.co.uk/Dr. Hilary, or on Talk Radio's website at talkradio.co.uk.